obviously a lot of people have been saying, will the Braves get a starting pitcher? What I know you've said you would like to. Where does that stand right now?
Look, our plan coming into camp before the Schwellenbach news was we were looking at Holmes being our fifth. He did a good job last year before he got hurt, and he's totally healthy. So right now, Holmes, Lopez, Strider, and Sale, those four guys are set in our rotation. We like those guys. We like the upside, the ability, and Schwellenbach, we had fully expected him to be healthy. He'd been throwing bullpens, been doing really well, and it's obviously really unfortunate what happened. So right now we've got competition for that 5 spot, and we like the options we have. We like the guys we have. I think the big thing for us was if we felt it was someone that we could slot in towards the top of the rotation, that's something that we would look to do. But again, we're still going to continue to have, you have discussions all year. Spring training, there's still guys out there, guys in trade. You continue. But again, we like the 4, and the guys we have competing for the 5th spot we like as well. I think, a big key for us is going to be getting our offense back to what it's been in the past and making sure we have a solid bullpen. And I think we're on track to have that. So, the big thing for us is if you look at past springs, we've broken with all kinds of starters coming out, but we've had really good offenses and good bullpens to hold the fort down. But if you look at those front 4, we like those guys, and it would have been that much stronger with obviously Schwellenbach. But even the guys competing for the 5th spot, we're excited about.
How about for insurance? You've got Holmes you don't know about. You feel good, you hope.
Yeah.
Lopez, you hope that he's going to be healthy. But is there a need to say, we might need that insurance?
Yeah, look, I think the tough part is that you're making commitments to certain guys, right? So you're taking the information you have. So, I think when we started the offseason, there was, like you talked about, you said, okay, well, there's a little more uncertainty with those guys. We're so much further removed now, right? We're sitting here in the middle of February with those guys specifically, and we just know more about Holmes and Lopez, and we were checking on them all offseason. So, look, we will have injuries. There's no doubt about it. We're going to have more. That's just reality. But we want to commit to those guys for spots as well. Lopez was an all-star with a sub-2 ERA. It's tough to say you don't even have a chance to be in the rotation. We're sticking you in the bullpen. So you're balancing a fine line between insurance and depth. And look, it's tough. Normally, depth are kids, right? They're guys that you can option, or older guys like the Martin Perez's and the Carlos Carrascos and those guys that are non-roster and so on. Otherwise, you're guaranteeing guys rotation spots. So. We feel good about Ronaldo. We feel good about Holmes. Strider, Sale. We feel good about those 4. We're just so far removed. I couldn't have told you that in October, right? We just didn't know at that time, but we're months removed from that.
Have you been close to signing anybody? Or frustrated that you haven't been able to?
No, I know. Look, I've seen all the rumors, this and that. Again, our focus has been on guys we think can slot towards the top, whether that's trade or signing and so on. That's not to take anything away from the guys that have been out there and signed. And look, some guys are going to go have great years, but for us, it was who are they going to knock out of the rotation, And again, that's why when Schwellenbach was healthy, we were like, okay, well, if Grant Holmes is potentially our 5th and we're going to knock someone out, it better be someone we think could be a front of the rotation type. But right now with those 4, we think those guys are all capable of being really good starters. Those top 3 have had a lot of success, and Grant was doing a really good job last year before he got hurt. So, in terms of close and things like that, until things are done, you don't know. But we've definitely, had a lot of conversations throughout the winter.
This time last year, you mentioned
right.
the offense.
Where are you going, Bo?
Turn right, Bo. This time last year, you mentioned the offense. You mentioned it again. How confident are you that this lineup can return to its true form if everyone can stay healthy? Ronald, Ozzie, Austin, the whole gang.
I think the key is depth. And I think, you're going to have guys that get off to slow starts like we had last year. You're going to have injuries like we've had in the past. When you're not as deep, you can't sustain those as much, right? So if you're 6 deep in the lineup, maybe 7, and all of a sudden some guys are off to slow starts, some guys are getting hurt, now you're really, really thin. So we feel, from a talent standpoint, this is the deepest group of position players that we've had. And so I think the pressure on all these guys to be their best is not as great. Now, the upside's there if they are, but we feel like 1 through 9, it's a really deep lineup. And even our bench, we feel it'll be a lot stronger as well. And especially when Sean Murphy and Kim come back, we're going to get that much stronger, and we're going to have some tough calls to make. So, again, if you look at past years, I mean, I think of all the years, in the 8 years I've been here, the 7 playoff teams, I remember we had opening series against the Phillies. And they weren't established yet. Kyle Wright and Bryce Wilson in the rotation. We got swept. A few years ago, we had Jared Schuster and Dylan Dodd breaking in the rotation. But we were scoring runs, and we had a good bullpen, and we were winning divisions and winning 100 games and things like that. So, the last 2 seasons, we've put so much more pressure on the rotation because the offense hasn't been the same, right? So we've had to win games 3-1, 4-2, and so on. So I think having that depth is pretty critical now. So if guys get off to slow starts, it's not on 3-4 guys in the lineup. We're going to have that balance. So I'm pretty excited about that. And also, I think the depth of the bullpen is a lot greater as well.
What was your decision to move on from Mizuno, and who do you think can kind of fill in that DH role?
Look, I think it's well documented. Marcel was an awesome teammate, and he was great in the month of April, and even his May numbers were really good as well. But April, he was elite. He got banged up with the hip early. He was able to overcome it, but I do think that impacted his year. Excited that he got a spot. I think he'll do great things for the Pirates as well. I think, Walt talked about it even when he had his interview. His preference was to have the DH spot be open, just to be able to get guys off their feet and so on. And again, when Marcel's 39, 40 homers, top 5 MVP bat, those are guys are easy to carry as everyday DHs. But, going forward with some of the guys we had, just the roster made more sense with having that spot open. And it allows us now to move guys around. And I think it's just going to fit more Walt style.
Alex, when you guys acquired Sale, obviously you trade for him, you extend him. You felt good about it, but there was some risk. I guess, one, has it worked out even better than you could have imagined? And two, how valuable has he been off the field and just having him here?
Yeah, look, we obviously, I remember when we did the trade, I told Terry McGurk at the time, because obviously he's signing off on everything, and just said, look, it's going to get loud. Because Vaughn was an exciting young player. He's charismatic and so on. And look, Chris had missed a lot of time. So I knew there'd be a lot of criticism and so on, and that was fair. But we felt pretty good with what we knew of the health. And, the exciting part was the person, beyond the ability, of course. But I always say it would have been unbelievable to have 25-year-old Chris Sale as a GM and just have him be that pillar and that rock. And he's such a great example, And I'm really fortunate the years I've been here, we've had guys like Charlie Morton as well. We have so many young arms in this organization. It's something we always spend a lot of time and effort on in the draft and so on. Having him as an example is great. So, look, we didn't expect Cy Young. I don't think anyone does. He hadn't won one in his career, and we'd be lying if we said that. But, look, for us, the contract we gave him, the extension, we had an option for that following year. So we had no need to do it, but we wanted to have him settle in. We wanted, an option for the following year, which was now 2026. And but we thought he could be back to a mid to front of the rotation guy. And he's done all of that and then some.
I know you're not going to get into his future or anything, but do you feel confident he could pitch another few years if he wanted to?
Oh yeah, look, I'm hoping Chris Sale is here as long as he wants to continue to go, and that would be our goal. So. One of my favorite players I've had as a GM. I'm grateful I've had a chance to be part of his career and be a part of a team that had him. So I just don't. Those guys are so hard to find, and the value beyond what they do on the field is immense. So the hope is that he plays as long as he wants to, and it's going to be with the Braves.
How happy are you that you were able to do what you did with the bench? By adding Dubon and Yaz, how much has that strengthened this roster?
I think it's key, and I think the big thing is that those guys are great in the clubhouse. Importantly, they accept their role, but it just, with what had happened in the past, we didn't focus as much on the bench because our position players had not had any injuries. We were so durable, and there was no playing time, really. But now, with the way we're set up, with guys missing time at the beginning of the year, and the fact that Yaz can play all 3 outfield spots has tremendous value as a left-handed bat as well. Dubon can play all the premium infield positions, play center field as well. So you have Eli White as a backup center fielder, but Dubon's played, solid amount there as well. So having guys that can play short and center and be great clubhouse guys, those guys are really hard to find. So we just haven't had that type of depth. It's been challenging to get guys to come because they knew there wasn't playing time when guys are playing 140 plus. So that's always been a challenge. But I think now the way we're set up with the DH spot being open. Again, that's going to be a challenge for Walt, but it's a good problem to have too many good players. You are protected now when guys go down and guys get hurt.
I feel like last year might have been one of the most challenging as a GM to kind of manage. What is the biggest thing you kind of learned from that? Is it the depth, or what did you learn during?
You know what? I think, we pitched well at the beginning of the year. We just weren't scoring runs, and it was just we were putting a lot of pressure on all the other parts. And we had a bunch of bad luck too. If you look at really that Mets series, we had that 4-game series against the Mets at home, and Sale had that great outing. Then he cracked the ribs, but we were really starting to trend well and really starting to perform well. But offensively, we still were having a really hard time. So we were hoping eventually we were going to get going. But I think, again, we've been very productive as an organization for the last 7 years. Last year we didn't have the results we wanted. But I do think, the last two from an offensive standpoint, we just haven't been up to par. So just getting back to a little more upside offensively, a little more depth, I think it'll take pressure off of all the other parts.
How can you, when you assess what your offense might do, how do you factor in Ozzie may be better another year removed from a hand injury, Austin maybe another year removed from a hand injury, and Acuna obviously another year removed from.
Yeah, I think, you know what? Betting on the upside, I think that's where we know it's there, but we're not counting on it, right? So that's not to say they're not capable or we don't believe in them, but we don't need them to hit their upside. We don't need a 99th percentile outcome for these guys. So because we're so much deeper in the lineup. So look, the fact that Harris and Ozzie were top 10 worst OPS in the game for the first half, those guys shouldn't do that. They know it as well, and they did turn it around second half of the year. But it's a lot more impactful when that happens, when 3 or 4 other spots in the lineup aren't doing their job as well or not productive. Now you've got only 3, 4 hitters doing it. So that just is really, really tough. So I think we're set up now that the lineup, even if these guys are good, not great, or solid, I still think we have a chance to have a very good offense. And then we've got tremendous upside if these guys can be the all-stars that their talent says they are.
Alex, payroll-wise, if something pops up in the next month or even trade, do you feel you're not limited? You have a...
Now, look, I know it comes up every year. It's the highest payroll in the history of the Braves. So I know people talk about tax and so on. We're into the tax, but that's not. We don't sit there as a goal. It's just, when Kim deal came up, had a conversation. It was a quick yes. When Tyler Kinley deal came up, conversation. It was a quick yes. So it's always been yes if there's a deal out there that makes sense, and for the right players, we're going to do it. So. I don't think there's any change there. I think it's a matter of what's the opportunity cost in terms of who are we going to take at-bats away from, who are we going to take innings away from in the bullpen or the rotation. Because ultimately you're always trying to balance the short term and the long term. You want to give guys an opportunity. I mean, I talked about this a year ago. When it was Grant Holmes and Charlie Morton for us. It wasn't financial. It was, are we going to give Grant an opportunity? We love Charlie, but we felt like Grant, we needed to get him the innings, the base, and it would set us up better for 26 and beyond. But if we left him in the bullpen the entire time as an out-of-option guy, so we just thought developmentally. And look, for the most part, he did a good job until he got hurt. He was doing a really, really good job. So, same thing when we tried to sign Josh Donaldson back. It was up to a certain point, and then we're blocking Riley, right? So, and then Riley would have to go to the outfield to sell. But at a certain point, we would have done it. So I think you're always balancing who are you taking innings and at-bats away from by bringing somebody else in.
And you've spoken on it before, but to have the offseason, you're having to address what you did without having to dip into the prospects.
Yeah, look, a lot of these guys that got traded, we had the players to go get those guys. We ultimately chose not to do it. And look, that's over the years we've had guys have asked about Harris or Strider, Drake Baldwin, and so on, and we elected to keep those guys. So, there's great players being moved. And at the same time, you have to decide. We want to be sustainable, right? We want to feel like every year coming into spring training, we have a chance to win a World Series, get to the playoffs for sure. But we want to have an organization that we don't want to have to go through a rebuild or a dip like what the organization went through before I got here. So it happened. It was the right decision, clearly. I've said this. I applaud from Terry McGurk down the fact that they stuck with it. It's hard to do. It's hard to really. Keep your nerve and go through the rebuilding and the tough seasons and so on. But they did it. Maybe 1 or 2 like we've done in the past. But for the most part, we had a really good staff, a lot of success with that staff. The staff that came together, it was about those specific individuals. We weren't sitting there saying we're getting someone at third or getting someone at first or getting someone in the bullpen. There were so many openings this winter, I think 9. which created a ton of opportunity, a ton of candidates, right? There was so much turnover across the game. So you had a flood of people that in one off season were available. So in my view, it would have been foolish for us to not explore that and to take a look at that. And again, if it wasn't for these specific coaches we have now, a lot of the guys that were here last year would have been back. I mean, they did a good job. What happened last year, the injuries and so on, I don't know that anyone could have overcome that from in terms of being a coach. But so far, it's been great. And they're going to take time and build relationships and so on. But I like the fact that there's some pre-existing relationships amongst the group. Some of them have worked together and so on. And Walt's obviously easy to get along with. And this is a great time for them to get together. You're here daily. You're not worried about a win and a loss. And you really get a chance to gel.